This video is about real historical events that sound so fake they shouldn't exist. Wars started over food, weapons guided by animals, leaders panicking over smells, hats, and imaginary threats. Every story you're about to hear actually happened, and the only mystery is how humanity survived being this ridiculous. 1. A New Jersey man named Thomas Fitzpatrick turned a casual bar bet into an absolute aviation legend in 1956. He was drinking at a bar in Manhattan and bet someone he could get from New Jersey to New York in 15 minutes. He drove to an airfield, stole a single-engine plane, and landed it right in front of the bar on a narrow city street in the middle of the night. He only got a small fine because the judge was honestly impressed he did not hit any buildings. But the best part is 2 years later he did it again because another guy at a bar did not believe the first story. He stole another plane and landed on another street just to prove a point. He is the literal patron saint of hold my beer moments. 2. During World War II, the most famous sailor in the German and British navies was actually a cat named Unsinkable Sam. He started his career on the German battleship Bismarck, which was sunk in a massive battle. The cat was found floating on a board and rescued by the British destroyer HMS Cossack. A few months later, the Cossack was torpedoed and sank, but the cat survived again and was transferred to the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal. Unbelievably, that ship was also torpedoed and sank 3 weeks later, and Sam was found clinging to a piece of wreckage, angry but alive. He is the only cat in history to survive the destruction of 3 major warships and was eventually retired to a sailor's home because nobody wanted to let him on a boat ever again. 3. In 1943, the USS O'Bannon found itself in a situation that sounds like a high school food fight gone wrong. They surfaced right next to a Japanese submarine so close that their big guns could not aim down low enough to hit it. The sailors on deck realized they were unarmed and about to be shot, so they grabbed the only thing available, which was crates of potatoes. They started chucking spuds at the enemy sailors, who panicked, thinking the potatoes were hand grenades. The enemy crew was so terrified of the starchy projectiles that they focused on dodging instead of loading their deck gun, giving the O'Bannon time to pull away. It stands as a naval victory partially credited to a root vegetable. 4. During World War II, the British military seriously considered fighting the enemy with a giant floating popsicle. Project Habakkuk was a plan to build a massive aircraft carrier out of pykrete, which is a mixture of wood pulp and ice. The idea was that steel was scarce, but water and sawdust were everywhere, so why not make a ship that looks like an iceberg? They wanted it to be 2,000 feet long and unsinkable, because if it got damaged, you could just freeze some more water into the hole. They actually built a prototype in Canada, and it worked perfectly until they realized that keeping a giant floating ice cube frozen in the middle of the ocean required way too many refrigerators. 5. In 897, the Catholic Church hit peak absurdity with the cadaver synod, where a deceased man was dragged into court. Pope Stephen VI hated his predecessor, Pope Formosus, so intensely that death was not a valid excuse to stop the legal proceedings. Stephen ordered Formosus's 9-month-old body to be dug up, dressed in full papal robes, and propped onto a throne. A terrified teenage deacon had to stand behind the body and answer for it while Stephen screamed questions at the silent face. Unsurprisingly, the deceased pope lost the case. It proves that petty grudges in the Vatican had absolutely no expiration date, even if the defendant couldn't technically speak. 6. In 1922, New York City fell into absolute chaos because of a fashion rule that nobody actually wrote down. Apparently, wearing a straw hat past September 15th was considered a social crime, so a mob of teenage vigilantes decided to enforce the calendar with their fists. They roamed the streets, snatching hats off grown men's heads and stomping on them like they were putting out fires. It turned into a citywide brawl called the Straw Hat Riot, where police had to be called in to protect people's headwear from aggressive fashion critics. History has rarely seen a major American city shut down just because guys were too passionate about seasonal accessories. 7. In 1784, the Holy Roman Empire and the Netherlands went to war, and the only victim was a pot of soup. The conflict is literally called the Kettle War because a Holy Roman ship tried to sail down the Scheldt River, and the Dutch fired a single warning shot to stop it. The cannonball missed the ship entirely, but managed to hit a soup kettle on the deck, destroying the crew's lunch. The captain surrendered immediately because he apparently could not fight on an empty stomach. Both sides negotiated a treaty afterwards, showing that the most effective way to end a military standoff is to threaten the enemy's catering service. 8. During World War II, the American military decided that the best way to guide a missile was to put a pigeon inside it. Psychological researcher B.F. Skinner developed Project Pigeon, where he trained actual birds to peck at an image of a target on a screen to steer the bomb. He built a nose cone with 3 tiny windows and strapped 3 pigeons into little harnesses to act as the pilots. The military watched a demonstration of this feather-powered guidance system and admitted it worked perfectly, but they canceled it anyway because they just could not stop laughing at the idea. It is a rare example of a weapon rejected simply because it looked too ridiculous to be taken seriously. 9. In 1958, the city of São Paulo in Brazil held a city council election, and the voters were so sick of corrupt politicians that they elected a rhinocerous. Cacarico was a 5-year-old female rhino living at the local zoo, and people started writing her name on ballots as a massive protest. When the votes were counted, the rhino had won by a landslide, getting more votes than any human candidate and beating the major political parties combined. The election officials were forced to disqualify her because she was, a zoo animal. But she remains the most popular politician in Brazilian history simply because she never promised anything she couldn't deliver. 10. In 1989, Pepsi managed to become the 6th largest military power in the world just by selling soda. The Soviet Union loved the drink, but their money was worthless internationally. So they offered to pay Pepsi with a fleet of 17 submarines, a cruiser, a frigate, and a destroyer. The CEO of Pepsi accepted the deal and suddenly found himself commanding a naval force that was bigger than most countries could afford. He jokingly told the U.S. National Security Advisor that he was disarming the Soviets faster than the American government was. They eventually sold the ships for scrap metal, but for a few days, a soda company could have technically started a naval blockade. 11. During World War II, the Polish army was desperate for soldiers, so they officially enlisted a Syrian brown bear named Voytech. He was not a mascot. He was a private with a serial number, a pay book, and an official ration of cigarettes, which he actually ate instead of smoking. He drank beer with the other soldiers and learned to salute when higher-ranking officers walked by. During the Battle of Monte Cassino, while human soldiers were struggling, Voytech was casually carrying 100-pound crates of artillery shells without breaking a sweat because he was, a giant bear. He retired as a corporal and lived in a zoo, proving that sometimes the best soldier in the unit is the one who literally works for honey and belly rubs. 12. In 1754, the town of Windham in Connecticut went into full panic mode because of the Battle of the Frogs. In the middle of the night, the residents heard a terrifying, deafening roar that sounded like a massive French army drumming for war. The town militia grabbed their muskets, people ran into the streets screaming, and some prepared to surrender to the invisible enemy. When the sun came up, they didn't find soldiers. They found thousands of bullfrogs fighting over a drying pond. The noise was just the frogs screaming at each other for water. The town was so embarrassed that they became a national joke for decades, essentially getting pranked by nature's loudest amphibians. 13. Dr. John Harvey Kellogg is famous for cereal, but he actually invented cornflakes as a weapon against having a good time. He was a strict doctor who believed that spicy or flavorful food made people sinful and hyperactive, so he wanted to create the most boring, bland food possible to stop people from acting on their urges. He literally designed the flakes to be an anti-party drug for your breakfast bowl. He accidentally created a billion-dollar empire because people decided to dump sugar on his cardboard flakes and enjoy them anyway. It is the biggest backfire in culinary history. He tried to ruin fun, and instead, he just gave everyone a sugar rush. 14. The United States military once spent millions on Project X-ray, which was a plan to strap tiny napalm bombs to bats. The idea was to release thousands of bats over Japanese cities, where they would roost in attics and burn everything down. It sounds like a comic book plot, but they actually tested it in New Mexico. The problem was that the bats did not follow orders because they are bats. They escaped the testing zone and decided to roost under the fuel tanks in the general's car, burning the entire brand new US Army airbase to the ground. It remains a singular case where a weapon successfully destroyed its own headquarters before even leaving the country. 15. In the 16th century, a German knight named Gottfried von Berlichingen became the original Iron Man after losing his hand to a cannonball. Instead of retiring, he paid a blacksmith to build him a fully functional robotic iron hand with gears and levers so he could still hold a sword and play cards. But his real claim to fame happened during a siege when an enemy commander asked him to surrender. Gottfried yelled down from the castle walls that the captain could lick his ass. This is historically recorded as the first time that specific insult was used in a formal military negotiation. He is literally the patron saint of not giving up and being incredibly rude to authority figures. 16. In 1859, the United States and Great Britain almost started a massive war over a single farm animal in what is now known as the Pig War. It started on San Juan Island when an American farmer shot a pig that was eating his potatoes, not realizing the pig belonged to a British employee. Instead of just paying for the ham, the British authorities threatened to arrest the farmer, and the U.S. Army responded by sending Captain George Pickett with a company of soldiers. It escalated until 3 British warships and thousands of troops were aiming their cannons at the island, all because of a disagreement over a potato patch. The only casualty in the entire international standoff was the pig itself. 17. The Swedish warship Vasa was supposed to be the terrifying pride of the Navy in 1628, but it holds the record for the shortest maiden voyage in history. The king insisted on adding a second row of heavy bronze cannons to the upper deck, even though the master shipbuilders warned him it would make the ship top-heavy and unstable. They launched the ship in Stockholm Harbor with a massive celebration, including foreign ambassadors and cheering crowds. The ship sailed for less than 20 minutes, caught a light breeze, tipped over like a toy in a bathtub, and sank completely just a mile from the dock. It was the most expensive naval disaster caused entirely by a boss who refused to listen to the engineers. 18. In the 1850s, the United States Army decided that horses were too mainstream and imported dozens of camels to Texas to create the U.S. Camel Corps. The Secretary of War thought that camels would be perfect for transporting supplies across the dry American West, just like in the Middle East. The experiment actually worked technically, but the camels were incredibly rude, smelled terrible, and scared the horses so much that the cavalry units were constantly in chaos. The soldiers hated the animals so much that the project was abandoned, and the camels were just turned loose into the desert where they confused locals for years. 19. The Dutch economy in the 1630s experienced the first major financial crash in history, and it was caused entirely by an obsession with flowers. During Tulip mania, the price of tulip bulbs skyrocketed to the point where a single bulb was sold for the price of a fancy mansion on the best canal in Amsterdam. People were trading their life savings, land, and livestock just to own a specific striped flower root that had not even bloomed yet. Then one morning, everyone suddenly realized it was just a plant, and the market collapsed instantly, leaving thousands of investors broke with nothing but a garden to show for it. 20. In 1918, the Brazilian Navy entered World War I with a vengeance, but their first major battle was against a school of confused sea creatures. The crew of the cruiser Bahia was patrolling the Atlantic when they spotted periscopes breaking the water and immediately panicked. They unleashed a massive artillery barrage, firing heavy cannons and machine guns into the waves for hours to stop the German threat. When the smoke finally cleared, they realized they had not sunk a submarine fleet but had actually just annoyed a large family of porpoises. The official military report had to explain that they used enough ammunition to sink a battleship just to win a fight against a pod of dolphins. 21. General Santa Anna of Mexico loved himself so much that when he lost his leg in 1838, he decided it deserved a better funeral than most presidents. He did not just bury the severed limb quietly. He ordered a full state funeral with military honors, cannon salutes, and a grand parade. He invited foreign diplomats, politicians, and generals to stand in the hot sun and pay their solemn respects to a decomposing piece of his shin bone. He even built a stone monument to his own leg in the capital city, proving that his massive ego was the only thing stronger than his army. 22. Peter III of Russia was technically a grown man and an emperor, but his hobbies were more suited for a bored toddler. He was obsessed with toy soldiers and set up elaborate dioramas in his royal bedroom. One night, a rat snuck in and chewed the head off a pastry soldier, which sent Peter into a rage. He did not just set a mousetrap, he caught the rat alive and held a formal military court-martial. He appointed judges, read the charges of treason against the crown, and spent hours conducting a legal trial for a pest, while his wife Catherine the Great probably realized she needed to take over the country immediately. 23. During World War II, the United States Army created a special unit called the Ghost Army that was armed with nothing but air pumps and heavy speakers. Their job was to trick the enemy into thinking a massive invasion force was gathering nearby. So they used giant, inflatable rubber tanks and fake wooden cannons. They drove around blasting recordings of troop noises and tank engines from huge speakers to simulate a busy camp. They literally fought the Nazis with balloons and sound effects, and it actually worked perfectly. The enemy wasted valuable ammunition shooting at rubber decoys, while the real American army snuck around the back to win the battle. 24. In the 1960s, Brazil and France almost started a naval war over the biological classification of a lobster. France wanted to fish off the coast of Brazil, but the Brazilian government said lobsters crawl on the continental shelf, so they belong to the land. France argued that lobsters swim, so they are fish and anybody can catch them in international waters. France sent a destroyer ship to protect their fishing boats, and Brazil mobilized its entire navy to intercept them. It was a massive diplomatic crisis that almost led to missiles being fired, all because two governments could not agree on how a crustacean moves its legs. 25. Otto von Bismarck was the Iron Chancellor of Germany and a terrifying figure, but he was once defeated by a raw pork sausage. A scientist named Rudolf Virchow challenged him to a duel, but since Virchow was the challenged party, he got to choose the weapons. He offered Bismarck 2 sausages, saying one was cooked and safe while the other was filled with deadly parasites. Bismarck looked at the sausages, realized he had a 50% chance of dying from a bad lunch, and immediately called off the duel. It is the only time in history a man with a mustache that big was terrified into submission by a piece of bratwurst. 26. One of the boldest scams in history happened in 1925 when a con artist named Victor Lustig sold the Eiffel Tower to a scrap metal dealer. He invited wealthy businessmen to a secret meeting in a fancy hotel and pretended to be a government official who was tired of paying for the tower's maintenance. He told them the city wanted to tear it down and sell the metal to the highest bidder. One guy actually believed him and handed over a massive suitcase of cash to secure the deal. Lustig took the money and fled to Austria. But the best part is that the buyer was so humiliated by his own stupidity that he never went to the police. Lustig realized nobody was chasing him, so he returned to Paris a month later and tried to sell the exact same tower to a different group of scrap dealers. 27. We always say something is the best thing since sliced bread, but in 1943, the United States government actually banned sliced bread to help the war effort. The Secretary of Agriculture decided that the heavy steel machines used to slice bread were wasting resources, and the wax paper used to wrap it was too valuable. The result was a nationwide meltdown where housewives were suddenly forced to use knives like they were living in the Middle Ages. Bakeries were furious, sales plummeted, and people wrote angry letters to the White House screaming about their jagged sandwiches. The ban was so universally hated and saved so little money that the government admitted it was a huge mistake and lifted it after just 2 months. 28. The ancient Romans gave us roads and aqueducts, but they also had a hygiene habit that would make a modern dentist faint on the spot. They believed that the ammonia found in human urine was the perfect chemical for whitening teeth, so they used it as a daily mouthwash. This was not just a poor person thing. the wealthy elite actually imported special bottled urine from Portugal because they believed it was stronger and more effective than the local stuff. Imagine being a high society Roman aristocrat paying top dollar for a jar of imported pee just to get that perfect white smile for a dinner party. It gives a whole new meaning to the idea of having fresh breath. 29. During the height of the Cold War, the United States Air Force developed a top-secret plan called Project A119, which was basically a proposal to nuke the moon. The Soviet Union had just launched Sputnik, and American generals were feeling insecure about losing the space race, so they decided to do something big. They wanted to launch a nuclear missile directly at the surface of the moon so that the explosion would be visible to everyone on Earth with the naked eye. The goal was literally just to show off and prove that they could blow up celestial bodies if they wanted to. They eventually canceled the project because scientists pointed out that radioactive fallout in space would ruin future research, and that missing the moon would be really embarrassing. 30. In the summer of 1858, London was hit by a crisis known as the Great Stink, which is exactly what it sounds like. The River Thames was basically an open sewer full of waste from millions of people, and a massive heatwave cooked it into a toxic soup. The smell was so horrific that it physically stopped the British government from functioning. Members of Parliament tried to soak their curtains in lime chloride to block the odor, but they still had to run out of the building with handkerchiefs over their faces, gagging in the hallways. They were days away from moving the entire capital to Oxford just to escape the smell of their own bad planning. It marks a moment where a world power was defeated by the scent of its own toilet habits. 31. In 1863, just off the coast of San Francisco, a violent conflict broke out known as the Egg War, which sounds delicious but was actually surprisingly dangerous. During the gold rush, hungry miners were desperate for protein, so rival gangs sailed to the Farallon Islands to steal millions of eggs from wild birds. These were not friendly grocery store trips. The egg companies armed their employees with rifles and shotguns to protect their nesting grounds. Rival factions actually engaged in full-scale shootouts on the slippery rocks, firing at each other while dodging angry seagulls just to secure breakfast ingredients. The government eventually had to send in the U.S. Lighthouse Service to stop the madness, proving that Americans will literally go to war over a good omelet if the price is right. 32. In 1679, the British Parliament passed the Habeas Corpus Act, which is a cornerstone of modern freedom, but they only passed it because of a fat joke that nobody corrected. During the voting process, the tellers were counting the members of Parliament one by one. When a very heavy lord stood up to vote, one of the tellers jokingly counted him as 10 people just to get a laugh from his buddy. The amazing part is that they forgot to fix the number later. The bill ended up passing by exactly 2 votes, which means that if that one guy had gone on a diet, the entire course of Western legal history would be different. A law that protects millions of people from unfair arrest exists solely because a politician thought it would be funny to roast his overweight coworker. 33. In the late 18th century, King Gustav III of Sweden was convinced that coffee was a deadly poison, so he ordered a massive scientific experiment to prove it. He took 2 identical twin brothers who were in prison for murder and offered them a deal. Their lives would be spared if one drank 3 pots of tea every day and the other drank 3 pots of coffee. The king expected the coffee drinker to die in agony within weeks. Instead, the doctors monitoring the experiment died of old age first. Then the king himself was assassinated, and finally, the tea drinker died at age 83. The coffee drinker lived even longer, proving that the king's big health scare was total nonsense and accidentally creating the longest caffeine study in history. 34. Lewis and Clark are famous for mapping the American West, but modern historians can actually track their exact campsite locations because of their bathroom habits. The expedition carried a powerful laxative medicine called Dr. Rush's bilious pills, which the soldiers nicknamed thunderclappers because of their explosive results. These pills were 50% mercury, which is not something you should ever eat, but it stays in the ground forever. Today, archaeologists can find exactly where the famous explorers camped by testing the soil for massive deposits of mercury left behind by the suffering men. They literally mapped the United States by leaving a trail of toxic waste across the entire continent, which is the most uncomfortable legacy a hero could ask for. 35. In 1869, a man named George Hull decided to pull a prank on a priest he had argued with, so he hired a stonecutter to carve a 10-foot-tall giant out of gypsum. He buried it on a farm in New York and waited a year before having some workers, accidentally, discover it while digging a well. The Cardiff giant became an instant sensation, with scientists claiming it was a petrified ancient man. P.T. Barnum, the famous showman, tried to buy it, but Hull refused. So Barnum simply built his own fake giant and claimed his was the real one. The public was so gullible that they paid to see both fakes, debating which piece of carved rock was the actual ancient human. It was a hoax war where everyone was lying, and the audience was just happy to be tricked. 36. In 1945, the German Navy lost a high-tech submarine not to a depth charge or a torpedo, but to a toilet-flushing error. The U-1206 was equipped with a super-advanced high-pressure waste disposal system that allowed the crew to use the bathroom while deep underwater. The problem was that the toilet was so complicated, it required a special technician just to operate the valves. The captain decided he could handle it himself without reading the manual, and he turned the wrong handle. A massive geyser of seawater and sewage flooded the submarine, mixing with the batteries to create toxic gas. The captain was forced to surface the boat right in front of the British Navy and surrender, making it the only warship in history to be scuttled by a bowel movement. 37. Benjamin Franklin is one of the founding fathers of the United States, but in 1781, he used his genius intellect to write an entire scientific essay about farts. The Royal Academy of Brussels had asked for serious research papers on physics, so Franklin, who thought the academics were too pretentious, submitted a proposal called Fart Proudly. He argued that scientists should stop wasting time on useless theories and instead focus on inventing a drug that would make human gas smell like perfume or flowers. He wrote detailed calculations on how this would improve polite society and sent it to the smartest men in Europe just to troll them. He basically invented the concept of a high-effort joke post 200 years before the internet existed. 38. In 1910, a prankster named Horace de Vere Cole pulled off the dreadnought hoax, which humiliated the entire British Royal Navy using nothing but shoe polish and fake beards. He and his friends, including the famous writer Virginia Woolf, dressed up as the Emperor of Abyssinia and his royal entourage. They showed up at the flagship HMS Dreadnought and demanded a tour. The Navy, terrified of causing a diplomatic incident, rolled out the red carpet, fired a salute, and gave them a full inspection of the top-secret ship. The royals walked around speaking total gibberish like bunga bunga and looking at guns. The Navy never realized they were just a bunch of bored art students in costumes until the story hit the newspapers the next day. 39. We think of vending machines as a modern convenience for buying overpriced chips, but the first one was actually invented in the 1st century by Hero of Alexandria. He realized that people in Greek temples were taking too much holy water without paying, so he built a mechanical dispenser to stop the theft. Worshippers would drop a heavy coin into a slot, which landed on a lever that opened a valve for a few seconds, dispensing a shot of water before closing again. It was a brilliant piece of ancient capitalism that proved humans have always been trying to automate customer service. The only difference is that instead of a candy bar getting stuck, you were buying automated salvation from the gods. 40. P.T. Barnum was the greatest showman in history, but his best trick was basically a vocabulary test for people who stayed too long in his museum. His exhibits were so popular that the building would get overcrowded and nobody wanted to leave. Instead of hiring security guards to push people out, he simply put up a massive sign that said, "This way to the egress." The visitors, thinking an egress was some kind of exotic monster like a tiger or an eagle, eagerly followed the arrow through a dark door. They were shocked to find themselves standing in the alley outside with the door locked behind them, realizing too late that egress is just a fancy word for exit. He literally monetized the fact that his customers refused to use a dictionary. 41. The Norwegian military has a brigadier general who technically lives on a diet of raw fish because he is a literal penguin. His name is Sir Niels Olaf III, and he lives at the Edinburgh Zoo in Scotland. This isn't a joke. The Norwegian King's Guard officially adopted him, and over the years he has been promoted through the ranks with serious military ceremonies. He has a shiny badge on his wing and actually inspects the soldiers when they visit. Imagine being a tough, battle-ready soldier and having to stand at perfect attention while a flightless bird waddles past you to judge your uniform. If he doesn't like your boots, he might just peck you, and you can't do anything because he outranks you. 42. In the 1920s, Henry Ford decided he didn't just want to build cars. He wanted to build a utopian society in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. He bought a massive chunk of land in Brazil to grow his own rubber and called it Fordlandia. The problem was that he tried to force his American lifestyle on the local Brazilian workers. He banned alcohol, served them oatmeal and hamburgers instead of their traditional food, and the craziest part is that he forced them to participate in mandatory square dancing sessions. The workers hated the poetry readings and the hoedowns so much that they eventually chased the American managers into the jungle with machetes. The ruins of this Midwestern suburb are still rotting in the rainforest today. 43. In the 17th century, the Catholic Church had a major problem with a monk named Joseph of Cupertino because he simply could not stay on the ground. Joseph was not very smart, but he was so religious that whenever he heard a choir or smelled incense, he would go into a trance and literally float up to the ceiling. It sounds cool, but it was actually a huge nuisance during church services because he would drift over the altar and distract everyone. The other monks had to tie him down or weigh him down with heavy vestments just to keep him from bouncing around the cathedral like a holy helium balloon. He is the only saint in history who was basically banned from public mass for being a flight risk. 44. The voyage of the Russian Baltic Fleet in 1904 is widely considered the most incompetent naval journey ever recorded. Russia wanted to send its fleet around the world to fight Japan, but the problem started immediately. In the North Sea, miles from any war zone, they attacked a group of British fishing boats because they thought they were Japanese torpedo boats, nearly starting a war with England. Later, the sailors bought exotic pets in Madagascar, so the ship was overrun with snakes, monkeys, and crocodiles. They also managed to fire at their own ships during target practice. By the time they finally reached Japan after months of chaos, they were promptly destroyed in battle. It remains a masterclass in how not to run a navy. After hearing all this, here's the real question. What insane historical event did we not mention that absolutely belongs on this list? Not something famous? Something so stupid it sounds made up? Drop it in the comments and prove history is even worse than this video. Like if this broke your brain, subscribe if you want more proof that the past was unhinged.